So, I promised you this earlier. What is your policy on use of L1 when you're teaching Latinos in monolingual classes? Again, I look forward to seeing your answers. Here's my answer. I work in Pachuca occasionally, and my last teaching experience has been in Mexico, and there I try to be both systematic and explicit about ways to take advantage of Spanish. I use about 95% of English myself. I'm not afraid of Spanish. I use it frequently whenever I feel it can accelerate the process. But in general, I try to be the model to immerse my students, as we all do, I'm sure. I get my students to say all they can in English, obviously, just as we all do. But also, I ask them to make regular reference. I ask them often, just pause. In your head, translate it. Count the words. Notice the order. Think about it. Keep it in your head. You don't need to speak Spanish now. Just do it. Just stop, pause, think. Okay. Let's carry on. Just that little pause to allow the translation, because prohibiting it doesn't work. We know they're going to do it anyway. It's impossible to stop. So we need to find a way to systematize its use. Obviously, I can get them to pause and tell each other what's just been said in translating into Spanish or whatever. But it's so often you can look around the room when you sweep around the room, you know that not everybody's got it. So quickly just tell each other what's going on, paraphrase, etc. I'll give you an example of that in a second. I try to be systematic about it. I have clear signals when to stop and when to start, and the students know that I'm simply trying to facilitate. It's a fundamental group management tool. And what I tell my students that I'm doing, I'm very open about this. I'm giving you Spanish-specific English teaching and learning. And they say, oh, but teacher, we don't want any Spanish. That's not what the research says. The research says that most students really do appreciate regular reference to the mother tongue, not least because they're doing it anyway. And I think that I'm a better teacher because I know Spanish and Portuguese. I get invited to Turkey a lot for historical reasons, but my Turkish is awful. And I really struggle to give examples when I'm giving presentations in Turkey because I don't know both languages. I don't know both codes. I don't know what my students are thinking. And I do believe that I'm a much better teacher in Latin America than I am, for example, in Germany or Turkey, whose languages I just don't speak. So again, this mythology about native speaker hasn't really helped us, I don't think. Back to task one. Do you remember that task? A long time ago, I gave you a little task about thinking of more items of clothing. Can you think of 2 more items of clothing which begin with the same letter? Maybe make a note or in the chat box if you can. But also, as you do this, could you notice what's happening inside your coconut? What are you doing to yourself? Are you sort of bouncing words back and forth like a metronome? Sort of mental ping pong, looking for equivalence? We'll come back to that at the end of the session. So this is controversial. How many words is each level? I mean, it's very difficult to find out. If you look at the research, there you are. Active A1, for example, active 300, passive 600. Another one here, fewer than 1,500 words. Another one here, going back to the English vocabulary profile, I've actually counted how many words there are in each section. It's 784 A1, etc., etc. You can see the numbers there. Obviously, it's cumulative, and the student. I've tried to average it out by looking at all the sources I found. It seems to be somewhere in the region of 800 or so, 800 to 850 active words at A1. But it's not clear, and there's no agreement about this, I don't think. But to my mind, for Romance speakers, it should be well over 1,000. Which words? Well, I've shown you all those cognates. I would focus on cognates regularly and bringing in cognates because they're all Merry Christmas words. They're easy to comprehend, easy to use. Again, so I think our students should be exposed to at least 25% more words, most of which they can use at the lower levels. Let's have a look at another text. Could you read that text quickly? It's only 100 words. What level would you say this text is? Okay, and if you just put in some answers, we can see the spread during the transmission of this video. What I do with a text like that, in pairs, just read and circle the words you can answer. We'll look at the level issue in a minute. And there you are. They've got all these words which they can find. So I wonder if you think the level is still as high as perhaps you put the first time. Then what I do is I mark the stress. So I ask students to try to pronounce them first. Then I add the stress, which there you are in blue. So I've added the stress, and they can correct each other. Oh, we got that one right, we got that one wrong, etc., etc. Then they can try and say them correctly. And then I do whatever. Teach, read the text, answer the questions, extract the grammar, whatever you're trying to do with that particular text. And then right at the end of the class, just before they leave, I'll have the students, as you leave the class, just before you leave, pronounce them again, and then celebrate how much you can say better now and how much comes from Spanish. You can do this with any text. Just begin with, seek the cognates, try to pronounce them, add the pronunciation, do whatever else you were going to do, and then come back at the end of the class. It's a real nice shape for a class. Again, when I've taken the cognates out of that text now, and look, there are only 2 words there which are tricky. Every other word in that text, I think, the students could understand, possibly not jungle, okay. It's interesting when you take the cognates out of a text and you look at what's there, it's very, very simple. That's pretty much a late A1, early A2 text. And when you look at the cognates and you apply them to the, you look in the various classifications, those words are B1, B2, C1 and C2, but they're all available to our students. They're certainly comprehensible. Perhaps they won't know idyllic in their mother tongue, but even so, it's a good learning process to learn the 2. You get 2 things for the price of 1. So my answer is, I would say that text is A2 for Latinos, no more, because of what they can read it, they can comprehend it. With a little help, they can start to use that language. And I would say it's a strong B1 or probably B2 with a multilingual class. Someone, if they haven't got that advantage from Latin, that they're going to struggle an awful lot with that text. So again, they're not the typical types of text that you find in international methods or international course books, because they're written for the world. They're not specific enough for our students. So again, we're holding them back by not exposing them to words. So a tip, if you become a materials writer, writing materials for Latin America, don't edit out cognates. That's what happens across the board in international materials. Everything is edited according to the classifications of word level. But what we should be doing for our students, we don't need to edit out the text at all. We should be helping them and giving them the confidence to tackle these words, enjoy these words, and perhaps even use these words. Then this is what I would do. I just threw this in because this is how I teach, and I think it's very useful to have a daily teaching thing. What I would do is ask students to try and remember the 10 cognates from the text. I do this all the time. Just pause, in pairs paraphrase, in pairs summarize, in pairs check comprehension, in pairs translate back and forth what you've just seen. Ideally in English, but obviously depending on the level, they can use Spanish too. And this is how I get my students systematically to help each other using the mother tongue, sharing what they've understood. So just a pause, check, then let's get back into English again. That's systematic, and students, in my experience, really enjoy that. I just want to look at one way I think which is really interesting for using the mother tongue is when you ask students to do a listening comprehension in English, and then you say to pause, in pairs, what did you understand? Why don't, if you haven't tried it yet, try this. Try asking them to feed back in Spanish the first time. Because if you ask them to comprehend in English and then share in English, it's actually, and then perhaps tell the class in English, who is going to answer the questions, who is going to do the task. It's going to be the strongest speaker. It's going to be the one who's the best speaker, not necessarily the best listener. If you ask them to listen in English and then summarize, paraphrase, etc. in Spanish, at least the first time, then whilst you're monitoring the class, you can really find out who is the best listener. and focus purely on the listening skill rather than mixing listening and speaking. It's a really interesting way of going about things. And you can do this with the other skills too. Just switching between languages is a really good way to isolate the target skill and to find out who really has understood and exactly what they have or haven't understood. One more thing is with a CLIL type class, it's what I like to do is that just if we're doing sort of save the world yet again, just begin by putting all the words on the screen if you're teaching online or on the board as they come into class. Begin with the cognates, all the cognates that are in the text or all the cognates they might need for the discussion. Ask the students to guess the pronunciation, and obviously they can find out the meaning of the words in brackets which are not cognates. And then add the word stress, and then I just changed my glasses to make me slightly more interesting for you because you've been looking at my boring old face for a long time. And then pairs can celebrate or modify their guesses. And that's how you can deal with a CLIL class. And obviously, depending on the topic, you can put an awful lot of language up there to make it accessible to our students. You couldn't possibly do this with a multilingual class because you don't know what they know from their various languages. So my summary of cognates and so on, we use L1 knowledge all the time. So let's share and celebrate this strategy systematically. It should be, thank God you speak Spanish or Portuguese, not no Spanish, no Portuguese. You can't switch it off. Imagine how much harder this would be if you didn't. Aren't we lucky? Aren't we lucky? That's my attitude to Spanish and Portuguese. I think the universalist method is really holding students back, and they don't see the advantages they have. They don't see the potential for rapid progress. It's just there if we just shape things and tailor things appropriately. Ours is not a general English situation. We teach ESP-SP, which is English to Spanish speakers, or ESP, the real meaning of ESP is English to speakers of Portuguese. And I think we have to customize and tailor our pedagogical choices to local reality. On we go. I'm really looking forward to your feedback on this. I do hope you agree with me. Let's look at pronunciation briefly. We've done a lot on vocabulary. This is when I started teaching monolingual groups of Spanish speakers in 1983 in Venezuela. And the first thing I did was consult sort of Michael Swan's book about learner English, if you remember that. And it said that for Spanish speakers, there are 37 items you need to focus on. And I tried. Then much more recently, that wonderful book, Teaching English Pronunciation for a Global World, which came out last year, they reduced it down to 11 items. But it's got better and better and better. Excuse me. Because if you look at the current research, the main initial consonant priorities for international intelligibility for our students are actually only 4. So the more specific, the more we go for international intelligibility, English as a lingua franca, knowing our students, instead of the 37 items, which in 1983 I tried to cover, we can actually now just focus on far fewer things. So if you think about the number of pronunciation activities which you've used across your life, which you think, why am I doing this? It's not particularly relevant. If we go for much more tailored, specific approaches, we can reduce the content down to a very few but most useful items for our students. So it's a lighter, more efficient workload. Again, and it lets them see, and we can see that knowing their mother tongue is an asset, it's a resource. So many of the sounds in English exist in our students' mother tongues. And if you're looking to design an A1 pronunciation syllabus, I'm working on one at the moment. All of this I've included in some new material which I'm writing for A1. That's my pronunciation syllabus in terms of suffixes. You can cover all of that very easily at A1. Look at the words the students have access to, both to comprehend and, if you wish, they can try to produce them. So there's so much more we can do in terms of pronunciation by being more specific. And it's so much easier too when it's tailored to our students. A lot of time is saved.